Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the sessions today. Up next in this room is the session, Automate to Accelerate Innovation, where we'll learn how building automation into your cloud migration roadmap allows technology teams to focus on innovation and accelerate the development and delivery of products and services that achieve mission success. So joining me today is Commander Jonathan White. Commander White is the Platforms and Data Branch Chief at the U.S. Coast Guard. He is a senior technical project manager leading 4 diverse sections consisting of 100 personnel to implement core enterprise services across the Coast Guard. These services include ICAM, ITAM, patching, desktop service integration, testing. He was recently selected to stand up and lead the Coast Guard's Cloud and Data Branch and will be transitioning to this major effort over the next year. So please welcome Commander White.
Good morning, or afternoon.
Yeah. So looking to have a good chat this afternoon. I did want to kick it off first just with a little commentary. So for those that know me, I have a Navy background, went to the Naval Academy, and I was first the beneficiary of one of the key missions that the Coast Guard has back in, well, let's just say it was a couple decades ago. And we were out on a sailing trip, and a nor'easter came through, and the boats that we were on out on the Atlantic Ocean got really beat up, and we were trying to pull into, Ocean City, Maryland. And, you know, just total chaos. Coast Guard came out to rescue the Navy. So not a story that many Navy people will highlight from time to time, but it is something that from a mission perspective, the Coast Guard helps out people all around the world on a daily basis, and I appreciate that. So if you can just take a couple minutes from a mission perspective, kind of talk about what you all are doing, how you're trying to focus, and what we can be doing as a collective to help out.
Absolutely, and I think you highlight the problem with the Coast Guard. You either are interacting with us on a very bad day, or you're interacting with us because you're trying to register your boat and you really can't. So most of our services are in the background though. So we have 11 statutory missions. They range all the way from defense to law enforcement to tending buoys in the harbor. All right, so we make sure that you can drive your ship down safely. And our journey right now in technology is transformative. That's the word I would use. We're going from a very much on-prem enterprise and trying to rapidly build out our cloud infrastructure, do some migrations, but also focus on our data. And the data is what's going to drive our future mission. If you have read our Commandant's strategic message, tomorrow looks different, so will we. And tomorrow looks like a data-driven enterprise. And so we have a couple buzzwords. Data for decisions is something that we're really pushing. And one of my future tasks is to help pull that information in, provide it to the analytics folks, and then bring it back out to the mission edge so they can actually do their job. And hopefully the cloud and automation is going to enable that transformation.
All right, fantastic. Appreciate that. All right, so since you went there with the automation piece, and that's what the session's on, great tee up. So tell us about the role of automation in the U.S. Coast Guard today.
So today, automation actually plays a very small role in the Coast Guard. So we have a couple systems out there which will build a server for you or things like that, or we write a lot of PowerShell scripts, manually written PowerShell scripts. My outlook for that is going from that level of automation to fully automated. And I'm looking at it from a holistic viewpoint because in my view, automation is more about culture change, just as much as configuration management is all about culture. You need to follow the rules, but you also need to build and curate the environment where you can have an automation platform, right? And if you don't invest in it, and if you don't continually maintain it, then your automation is going to fail you, right? And so what I see where we're going with the Coast Guard is providing platforms for our end users, and those would include like Power Apps in the Microsoft 365 environment, which says Power Automate, but also support our developers for infrastructure, networks, and configuration management.
Okay. That covers a wide array of different areas for the automation. Now, the one that we are also talking about here today is from a cloud adoption perspective, right? So how do you foresee that kind of going in the direction with automation and getting you into the cloud?
So my policy moving into our cloud, we're just building out our secure cloud infrastructure, by the way. So my policy as the cloud and data branch chief is automate first, automate only. So you are not going to provision anything in our cloud environment unless it's through a software-defined or automated service. The end goal that I have when we transition our services in there 2 years down the road, I want to have the confidence that I can delete my cloud environment and rebuild it in a day using the automated scripts that we've stood up. I want to have that confidence that eliminates the fear of change and eliminates the fear of migration and builds more transparency into our process.
Okay, and so that ability to do that and the culture piece, so you're talking about culture, how are you bringing that into your automation strategy?
So right now, we're going to start with our on-prem environment with Ansible. We're going to rapidly deploy Ansible as a solution space to automate our on-prem environment. A lot of those same players, so the Coast Guard's a very small service, so we all have 3 or 4, I have 10 different jobs, right? And if I can convince our on-prem engineers to use automation platforms, when they go and pivot over to do the cloud for us, they're already going to be primed and ready to say, oh, I'm just going to automate that. I'm just going to write that as code. And it's a little bit of, we need to sell the vision of automation and the efficiency, but then also find quick wins and prove that it's actually a worthwhile investment. It's very hard to give up the 100-page checklist you have to build a server, because every time you follow that 100-page checklist, it builds a server. Now you have to rewrite that in code and maintain that code instead of the documentation. It's a bit of a transition, and that's the culture shift that I mentioned.
Okay. So with regards to the culture shift and some of the more legacy applications, right? So what role do you envision automation having with the modernization of legacy Coast Guard systems?
So right now we have a lot of, I call them unicorn systems out there. They're systems that were configured and built about 10 years ago. There's only one person in the Coast Guard that knows how to fix that system or put it back into baseline. If we're going to have to keep that legacy system around, I would like to capture that state in an automation platform. So if we had to rebuild that back to it where it was, we can hit a playbook instead of finding that one person who knows how it works. My obvious goal is to eliminate the legacy system, modernize it, put it on a managed platform, and let those application developers focus on the application layer and not the rest of the stack. And I want to do that through automation and through infrastructure control.
So it's more of a mission focus, being able to help out and direct application teams to specifically help out on that piece.
That's correct. If we're going to spend $1 million on a modernization effort, I want it to be user-focused, okay? Very, very much you get trapped in this back-end focus where you're trying to, I think the previous gentleman just mentioned, right? I don't want to focus on standing up a Kubernetes platform every time I have to write an application. I don't have to stand up a database server or hundreds of database servers and figure all that out. That just needs to be there. It needs to be able to be tapped into. And so when I focus energy towards modernizing, it's to 10 times the user experience, right? So right now our users are very disappointed in the applications that they have to use. They're usually clunky. There's a lot of bolt-ons, right? Because they've kind of grown over the years. So now's our chance to really design that and put it into production rapidly and run it through a pipeline, an automation pipeline that gets it there.
Okay.
And then be able to repeat that over and over and over again.
It's a great place to be when you get there, right? And hopefully it'll be sooner than later. So the other one that I was just curious about, you know, in our environment today, everyone's always trying to say, all right, we need to go do the next thing, right? And so you're targeting this automation, you know, journey that you're on. There's probably someone up the chain that's saying, all right, Commander White, what are the metrics that you're going to be measuring this against? How are you going to show that this is successful? How is this helping us to improve our mission? How have you addressed that, and how are you trying to set yourself and the Coast Guard up for success as you move forward?
That's a great question. So you want to measure the things that provide actual outcomes. And so what's the desired outcome from automation? And I think that's speed to market, that's accuracy, and that's also the ability to maintain your ACE of O, right, your availability. And you do that by being able to recover from a disaster situation very quickly, get back to baseline. So I had spent last 2 years, I was in Coast Guard Cyber Command in the escalated support division. I saw every single disaster that happened in the IT and the Coast Guard, right? Almost every single one of those was a manually resolved situation, okay? So I think the first metric I would put out there is, how many times did I not use a manual intervention to return to baseline, okay? How fast did I recover? And I claimed in my performance eval that we reduced our time to recovery by 50%. I'll go with it. But what I did to do that was focus on root cause analysis and targeted restoration service. So a lot of what I found when I got in the job was that we did exploratory work to kind of figure out all the different things that were going on, and not say, well, what predicated the problem in the first place? What configuration change happened? And oftentimes I found that it was some engineer way down the chain of command who made a change, rightfully, they was doing its thing, but it ended up propagating a problem way up the food chain, right? Almost maybe even eliminating email services for the whole Coast Guard. Yes, we did have that happen because of a configuration error, okay? And what it highlighted to me was that when you do a lot of these manual actions, and they're hidden, right? They're hidden between the engineer and the script that, or the config file he's editing, right? That when something does happen, you're searching, you're hunting to find where did the failure occur. And you finally find the engineer, who, by the way, is on vacation when the problem happens. You finally find the engineer who did the change. He said, oh yeah, I just did that change. He said, well, do you realize what happened? And he's the only one with the admin token to revert it too, right? I think automation pulls those changes closer to the decision point and further away from the actual engineer executing that change. So you can do code reviews, you can do pull requests on your version commits, or whatever you want to do to manage that. And then when a change gets pushed into production, it's a very much, it's a ceremonial activity, right? Very much like an agile effort. Hey, we're good to go, hit the play button, right? And I think you should see the cause and effect very quickly as that, and you should be able to revert it as well, because you can just undo your commit and press play again. I don't want to be finding engineers down in the bowels of the Coast Guard in order to figure out where the root cause is. So back to the metrics question, I want to measure how fast I can get to recovery on a complex system. Okay. And not be afraid of change.
So for those metrics, are you trying, because this is a journey that you're on, I know that you've started this process, right? Is it something that you're taking measurements on today to have a baseline prior to actually going down that journey, and then evaluating as you're going to see that improvement?
Not explicitly. So if you asked me to create a baseline, I probably could, based on my own personal experience and looking at ticket logs and things like that.
Right.
You asked me tough questions today. But yes, so good point. I think we do need to create a baseline and figure out where we need to go. But I think it's blatantly obvious that we're not doing things, to the optimal point right now, right? So as we get more mature, I think baselining and understanding, is it 10% improvement? Is it 50% improvement? Have we regressed? That becomes more and more important. But I think we're so far over to the left-hand side of this that any improvement is good, but it's good question.
Okay, no, it's good. So I think that you were also doing a session just recently, right?
That's
with
correct.
Regards to cloud. So what is the Coast Guard aiming to achieve in the cloud?
So the Coast Guard is aiming to achieve a rapid modernization effort. And I don't think the cloud necessarily enables a modernization effort. I say this as the cloud branch chief, or future cloud branch chief, right? I actually see the cloud as enabling focus on modernization, okay? And we discussed this earlier. If I can strip away a lot of the traditional IT work that you would do for a particular project, then you can focus on what matters. And really what matters is what the user does when they interact with that application. And what Mr. Wheeler said, what happens after that user interacts with the application? Where does the data go? What does that trigger? What does it interact with? What other services depend on that action? And what I see as the cloud enabling is building that core infrastructure platform from a fresh start. We don't have to go into our on-prem data center and kind of figure out how to go from A to B. We're just going to go straight to B in the cloud. And so what I see as the cloud being is that clean slate that we can paint off of and put our modernization piece onto, while also leveraging all of the investment that has been done in industry over the years. I want to immediately use that, right? I'm definitely not a not invented here person. I will steal your work. You put your work on GitHub, I'm stealing it, okay? Because we need to focus on the mission, focus on the user, focus on the outcomes, not focus on building IT systems.
Okay, no, and I'm there with you. My thing was always never recreate the wheel, right? If someone else has created a wheel and it works out really well, then by all means, we can always improve upon things, but why not use it, right? So,
absolutely.
All right, so what area or task do you think that Ansible can help automate for the Coast Guard?
So right now, I would say number one problem for the Coast Guard is configuration management.
Okay.
Very bad. And I think Ansible will be a 180 shift into how we approach configuration management. So like I said, you have the engineer in the corner writing his config file or doing 100-page documentation to do stuff. I want to immediately eliminate all of that. And Ansible, to me, is the ticket to that future state. And we actually have, what's encouraging to me is, as I do my road shows around the Coast Guard IT spectrum, and I mention certain technologies that I'm aiming for, and they go, oh my God, finally, somebody is going to push that out there, right? And so what I feel is like there's a pulling force along with my pushing force, right? And which is fantastic. I think we've met a really equilibrium. We just need to do it. And so that's my charge, right? I want to be on the stage next year saying how much we've done for automation. All right, I put myself on task.
All right, fantastic. Looking forward to having you at that one. And how about with regards to the cloud and Ansible and your work in automation there? What are your thoughts on trying to head in that direction? I know that's where you're trying to target, and that's the painting that you're going to be going towards. Where does Ansible fit in that one?
So I think it's part of a collective, right? So configuration management and server builds is one thing, but then there's like infrastructure automation, right? You have tools like Terraform and other enterprise-grade tools to manage cloud environments. You have network infrastructure that needs to be managed in the cloud, virtual private clouds and gateways and firewalls and transports and all that stuff that gets very complicated. And so I'm seeing a portfolio of tools or solutions that form. And as long as we approach that with, I am going to use those tools from the beginning, and everything that I do is via that tool system, Ansible's included in that, then I'm hopefully going to be successful 2 years down the road when I have 100 mission apps in the cloud, all kind of intercommunicating with each other, saving data, sharing information, putting applications out to end users. And I want to feel comfortable 2 years from now that we have control of that environment, right? I don't ever want to be in a position in our cloud environment where I'm afraid to make an adjustment. because then I would say that we've successfully replicated our on-prem environment in the cloud.
You've reduced a lot of that risk. So, I mean, you were talking about before where you're saying individuals that are having to maintain these config files and update. I'm assuming that that manual process is inherently, there's some risk associated with that?
There's whenever a human is in the loop, you're depending on that human to perform the task successfully, okay? So I think that a lot of the agile movement, a lot of DevSecOps movement is shift left, right? So you shift the failure of the human further away from the point of action, okay? So if the failure is occurring at the code writing level, and it has to go through a series of automated checks and balances before it gets to production, you can hopefully catch that error before it flies, right? Whereas if I write a series of documentations and it's all manual, I don't catch that error until the person actually does the work. Or if they misconstrued the instructions, I'll never catch. And it may be hidden for a year. So I have a great example for this. So we have several hub sites where we connect to our cloud environment currently. There's a direct route to our 365 environment. And one of those hub sites had a Trojan horse configuration setting in it. I say that because when they set it up initially, they allowed 15,000 concurrent connections or something like that, right? Then at some point, they changed it so that it was 40,000 concurrent connections. But they forgot one hub site. And by the way, that hub site serves our headquarters location, of course. And so once we reached a certain critical mass of adoption of our M365 environment, we breached that 15,000 limit, and people's connections were dropped. And we were like, well, everybody else is working fine. What's wrong with this site? And again, the engineer in the corner says, oops, I forgot to do this one.
Noble intent. They weren't trying to do it on purpose, but
that's right. Happened. And it was a hidden time bomb, right? It was working great until you crossed a certain threshold.
Yeah. It's hard to catch those.
It sure is.
So, all right. So what do you find from an automation perspective? What facets of automation do you find intriguing?
So what I find intriguing about automation is the fact that everybody thinks automation is easy. Right? I think the sales pitch is automate your problems away. No offense, it's kind of thrown out there a lot, but there's a significant amount of human capital work required to get to a point where you're automated, but then also sustain that automation. Okay? And if you're not thinking of automation itself as a DevSecOps action, you're not thinking about automation correctly. Right? You should be just as much as writing code for your application, you should be thinking that same workflow for writing your automation scripts and treating your automation scripts like that as well. And that requires a lot of brain trust, a lot of infrastructure stand-up and policy and procedures. The other thing I find intriguing about automation is configuration management of the automation itself. And I think it's easy to do that in the cloud. You have a central repository, you're running things pretty consistently on a single tool set, but we have about 80 or so cutters floating around in the ocean. We have a plethora of aircraft. Once I start pushing automation to the edge in a denied, disconnected, intermittent environment, how do I make sure that when that runs, it's running on the latest version, right? And that it wasn't tampered with. Like maybe the local administrator made some, we call them chi faults, right? You may be familiar with that, right? Where somebody goes, oh, I can do this better, and I'm gonna make a bunch of changes, and now all of a sudden they're out of compliance compared to the rest of the fleet. So I find that intriguing, that synchronization of expectation, right? Because you expect that code to be what it is, and reality is going to be a challenge we have in the future.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And when you look at it, it's a good point. So you're starting data center, you're working on the cloud, you've brought in the edge pieces like a future state that you're trying to drive towards, right? And so do you foresee, besides the obvious ones of the disconnected environments and those other aspects, Do you foresee any other, hurdles or challenges with regards to that edge environment that you're planning for today, and how are you planning for addressing that edge environment?
So one of the biggest problems with the Coast Guard is finding a solution that scales with us, right? So not all of our edge environments are created equal. Fast response cutters, they have about 8 racks. There's probably about 1.5 racks of free space in there. Whereas if you go to a national security cutter, they have an actual data floor on the ship. There's an actual room dedicated to servers, right? And all the other equipment associated with that. So I would call those different customer bases, right? So I want to find solutions that on the edge that scale appropriately, but can remain equal in capability, right? So almost like building a mini cloud, because the cloud's very elastic, right? But in hard form on a cutter, right? The other issue on aircraft is airworthiness and certifications and things like that. And how do you remain agile when you have to deal with those constraints, especially in the physical environment, right? Software is one thing, but if I need to put another server cluster on an aircraft, that could be a year-long activity. And it could be obsolete by the time I get that approved.
Yeah, that's not very helpful. All right, so your background, you just came over from security, right? And so you're working in that environment, and we've touched on a little bit. How do you see automation and security, working together, benefiting from each other? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I have kind of a jaded view on cybersecurity, right? We threw a lot of people at the problem and a lot of tools at the problem, and I think the problem has not gone away. In fact, I think it's gotten worse, progressively worse. There seems to be a solution space being pushed now as artificial intelligence will help seal those problems with security. But I think when you really like peel back that whole layer of the cybersecurity enterprise, right? Peel all that back, and what's the real problem? The real problem is lack of configuration management, lack of transparency, right? And lack of forward movement in systems. So how does an adversary get into your system? Well, there's probably two primary ways. They steal your password. Okay, we solved that with multi-factor authentication, hopefully, right? The second way is they find a hole, right? They exploit a weakness that they can get into, right? And so they can exploit that weakness because either you've failed to patch a known vulnerability, speed to market, or you've let your system drift in configuration that you don't even know that there's a hole there. And so we've tried to band-aid those solutions with a whole bunch of tools and a whole bunch of people, and you have the SIM and you have SOARs for managing your activities. You have ACAS or Nessus scanning tools, right? You have endpoint control tools, McAfee or Microsoft Defender and Tanium and all these other things. Those are all band-aids to the problem of not being able to sustain your systems in a configuration state, in my opinion. That if you're facing a targeted attack, nothing is going to help you. Pretty much nothing, right? So as soon as there's a vulnerability, they know about it, they're in, they're done, you're done, right? So we're talking more about the broad brush attacks that happen all the time. Right? So you want to prevent against those. Automation is a wonderful tool to increase that speed to market when a patch lands or a configuration change is required or whatever it is you need to do.
Yep, exactly right. All right, well, I really do appreciate it. Everyone, please join me in thanking Commander White for his great session today.